The hardest part was never being tired. The hardest part was pretending I was not. I had not slept more than 4 hours a night in almost a year. By 5:30 every morning, I was already standing behind the counter of a small coffee shop in Brooklyn, tying my apron while the city outside was still half asleep. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Espresso machines hissed. Delivery trucks rolled past the front windows. Most customers barely looked at me. They ordered assignments. Others worried about exams. I worried about staying awake. Drinks toward a table when I noticed a familiar face sitting alone near the window. The man from the bus. Expensive coat. Calm expression. Dark hair. He looked completely out of place among students, construction workers, and commuters grabbing breakfast before work. Yet he seemed comfortable anywhere. Then I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes for a moment. Ethan. The reason every dollar mattered. The reason quitting was impossible. The reason I kept moving even when my body begged me to stop. When class ended that night, snow covered the sidewalks outside. I pulled my coat tighter and started toward the bus stop. Across the street, a black luxury SUV sat waiting at a red light. For a brief moment, I thought I recognized the man from the coffee shop sitting inside. Then the light changed, and the vehicle disappeared into the city. What I did not know was that Vincent Romano had just learned my name. And for the first time, he was beginning to wonder what could possibly be important enough to keep a young woman running on determination alone. A week later, I realized I had started noticing Vincent Romano almost as often as he seemed to notice me. Not because he appeared everywhere. New York was too large for that. But our paths crossed just enough to feel unusual. One morning he was reading a newspaper near the coffee shop window. 2 days later I saw him leaving a building across from the grocery store. Then there was another glimpse at a traffic light while I waited for the bus after class. Each encounter lasted only seconds. Yet somehow I always recognized him immediately. Maybe it was the way he carried himself. Calm, focused, as though the chaos around him moved according to different rules. My own life felt nothing like that. By Tuesday evening, I was sitting beside Ethan's hospital bed helping him finish homework while a winter storm rattled softly against the window. He was 12 years old and far smarter than he realized. His sandy blonde hair needed a haircut. His smile always appeared at exactly the moment I needed it most. "You look tired," he said. I laughed. "You tell me that every time I visit. Because every time you visit, you look tired." I pretended to be offended. "Thank you for the support." He grinned. "You should sleep more." If only it were that simple. Instead, I helped him with math problems, listened to stories about his favorite video games, and carefully avoided discussing bills. Or tuition. Or the growing balance in my checking account that seemed to disappear as quickly as I earned it. By the time I left the hospital, snow had begun falling again. Thick white flakes drifted beneath the glow of streetlights. The city looked quieter than usual. Almost peaceful. I stopped at a pharmacy on my way home to pick up supplies Ethan needed. As I stood in line counting cash, a familiar voice spoke behind me. "Good evening, Ava." I turned and nearly dropped my wallet. Vincent stood several feet away holding a bottle of water and a folded umbrella. He looked as surprised to see me as I was to see him. "You know my name," I said before thinking. The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Vincent's expression shifted slightly. Not guilty. More amused. "You wear a name tag at the coffee shop." Heat rushed into my cheeks. "Of course I did." "Right." He smiled faintly. "Long day." "Very. You always say that." I laughed despite myself. "Because it is always true." The cashier called me forward. I paid for the supplies and gathered my bag. Outside, snow continued falling across the sidewalk. Vincent exited the store a moment later. For a few seconds we stood beneath the same awning watching traffic crawl through the storm. "Nursing school?" he asked. I blinked. "How did you know?" "Flashcards on the subway." Again a reasonable answer. Yet something about his observation surprised me. Most people never paid attention to details. Vincent seemed to notice everything. "That sounds slightly creepy when you say it out loud," I admitted. To my surprise he laughed. A genuine laugh. "Fair enough." The traffic light changed across the street. I adjusted my backpack. "I should go." Vincent nodded. Good luck with your studies, Ava. Then he walked toward a black SUV waiting at the curb. I watched him disappear inside before continuing toward the bus stop. What I did not know was that later that same night, Vincent would finally receive the answer to the question he had been asking for weeks. And the truth behind my exhausting routine was far more heartbreaking than he expected. A few days later, everything changed without me knowing it. My life looked exactly the same from the outside. Still woke before sunrise. I still balanced coffee orders, grocery inventory, and nursing textbooks. I still visited Ethan whenever I could. But somewhere beyond my small apartment and my carefully scheduled routine, a truth I had worked hard to hide was no longer a secret. It started on a Thursday evening. Class had ended later than usual because of a lab assignment. By the time I left campus, freezing rain had replaced the snow. The sidewalks shimmered beneath streetlights, and the cold air stung my face as I hurried toward the subway station. My backpack felt heavier than normal, packed with textbooks, notes, and unopened mail. Most of that mail contained reminders I could not afford to read. Tuition balances, medical statements, payment deadlines. I had stopped opening them immediately because the numbers never changed. They only grew larger. When I finally reached home, my apartment was dark except for the small lamp beside the couch. I dropped my bag onto the floor and immediately noticed an envelope sitting on the kitchen counter. Another hospital statement. I knew it before I even picked it up. For several minutes I simply stared at it. Then I opened it anyway. The amount printed on the page made my chest tighten. I sat down slowly. Outside the window, rain tapped against the glass. Inside, the silence felt overwhelming. Ethan's next treatment cycle was approaching. Insurance covered part of it. Not enough. Never enough. I reached for my notebook and began recalculating everything. Rent, groceries, transportation, tuition, hospital expenses. The math always ended the same way. There was not enough money. There had never been enough money. My phone buzzed. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. "Hey, you sound tired," he said. "That is becoming your favorite sentence. Because it keeps being true." His laughter filled the room. For a few minutes we talked about ordinary things. School, basketball, a science project he was excited about. He never complained. Not once. That somehow made everything harder. After the call ended, I sat alone with the stack of bills spread across the table. Then I made a decision I had been avoiding. For months. I opened my university portal and looked at my account balance. The number stared back at me from the screen. Tuition was due soon. There was no way to pay both that and Ethan's medical costs. One of them would have to wait. My eyes closed briefly. I already knew which choice I would make. Ethan always came first. Across the city, Vincent Romano sat inside his office overlooking Manhattan. Rain traced slow paths down the glass windows behind him. A file rested on his desk. My file. Not because he wanted to invade my privacy, because curiosity had finally led him to ask questions. The answers had surprised him more than he expected. No hidden debts. No reckless spending. No secret mistakes. Every paycheck from both jobs moved almost immediately toward hospital bills and educational expenses. Every sacrifice had a purpose. Vincent read the same page twice before setting it down. According to the report, Ava Bennett was 23 years old, nursing student, guardian to her younger brother after losing both parents several years earlier, working nearly every waking hour to keep both their futures alive. For a long time he simply stared at the city beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, I was probably studying under a dim apartment lamp while worrying about bills I could not pay. And for the first time in years, Vincent Romano felt something unexpected. Not curiosity, not admiration. Shame. Because despite all his power and resources, he could not remember the last time he had fought half as hard for anything as I fought for someone else every single day. A few days later, Ethan was discharged from the hospital for a short break between treatments. Bringing him home should have felt like a victory. In many ways it did. The apartment immediately felt brighter with him there. The television was louder. The refrigerator emptied faster. There were shoes in the hallway and video game sounds drifting from the living room. For the first time in weeks, the place felt less like a temporary shelter and more like a home. Still, the relief came with a cost. Every medication bottle on the kitchen counter represented another expense. Every follow-up appointment appeared on my calendar like a reminder I could not ignore. That Saturday morning, I woke before dawn and quietly prepared breakfast while Ethan slept. Pancakes were not in the budget, but I made them anyway. Sometimes normal moments mattered more than financial responsibility. The smell eventually pulled him from bed. "Either we won the lottery," he said as he entered the kitchen, "or you are feeling guilty about something." I laughed. "Neither. Definitely guilty." He sat down with a grin. Watching him eat felt strangely comforting. For a little while, neither of us talked about doctors or bills or uncertainty. We talked about movies, school, basketball, ordinary things. The kind of conversations most families probably took for granted. Later that afternoon, I left for my grocery store shift while Ethan stayed home with a neighbor who often checked on him. The store was crowded with weekend shoppers escaping the cold. Hours passed in a blur of stocking shelves and helping customers. By evening, my feet hurt so badly that every step felt heavier than the last. During my break, I checked my student account again. The balance remained exactly where I left it. Tuition was due in less than 3 weeks. I stared at the number until the screen dimmed. Then I locked my phone and returned to work. There was no point obsessing over a problem I could not solve. Across Manhattan, Vincent Romano sat inside a private conference room surrounded by financial reports worth millions of dollars. Yet his attention kept drifting toward a much smaller number written inside a different file. My tuition balance. The amount that stood between me and the future I had spent years chasing. One of his advisors was explaining an investment opportunity when Vincent interrupted him unexpectedly. How much would it cost to fund a nursing scholarship? The room fell silent. Several executives exchanged confused looks. "For one student?" someone asked. Vincent glanced toward the window. "For several." The conversation continued, but his mind remained elsewhere. Later that night, after everyone had left, he found himself reviewing information about nursing programs instead of business proposals. He read about graduation rates, student debt, staffing shortages in hospitals. Facts and numbers filled the pages, but all he could picture was a young woman studying flashcards on a late-night subway while carrying the weight of an entire family alone. Meanwhile, I was sitting in the back row of pharmacology class trying not to fall asleep. The professor's voice echoed through the room as students typed notes into laptops. My eyes burned from exhaustion. I rubbed them and forced myself to focus. One chapter at a time. One assignment at a time. One day at a time. That had become my entire philosophy. After class ended, I stepped outside into the freezing night. Snowflakes drifted through the glow of campus lights. Students hurried toward warm apartments and weekend plans. I headed toward another long bus ride home. What I did not know was that somewhere in the city, a man who had spent years believing money solved everything was beginning to understand something entirely different. Some people did not need saving. They simply deserved a fair chance. And for the first time, Vincent Romano was considering how to give me one without ever asking for credit. The following week brought the kind of exhaustion that settled deep into my bones. Finals were approaching. Ethan's next round of treatments was scheduled. My tuition deadline was now less than 2 weeks away. Every clock seemed to move faster than I could keep up with. On Monday morning, I nearly fell asleep on the subway and missed my stop. On Tuesday, I accidentally poured decaf coffee for 3 customers before realizing my mistake. By Wednesday night, even my nursing notes looked blurry. Still, I kept going. That was what survival looked like. One small step after another. One responsibility at a time. One sacrifice after another. The hospital called during my lunch break on Thursday. My stomach tightened the moment I saw the number. I stepped outside behind the grocery store into the freezing air before answering. "Everything is fine," the nurse assured me immediately. Relief washed through me. "We just wanted to confirm Ethan's upcoming appointments." I thanked her and ended the call. Then I stood there for several seconds staring at the gray winter sky. Fine. The word meant something different these days. Fine meant Ethan was smiling. Fine meant his condition had not worsened. Fine meant we had another chance. That evening after class, I stopped by the hospital carrying a small bag of snacks Ethan liked. He was sitting upright in bed reading a comic book when I arrived. You look terrible, he announced cheerfully. Good to see you too. He grinned. You need sleep. I need a winning lottery ticket. That too. We laughed together. Moments like that made everything else easier. For almost an hour we talked about school, movies, and his plans for spring when he was feeling stronger. He spoke about the future with such confidence that I sometimes forgot how difficult the present could be. When visiting hours ended, I hugged him goodbye and headed back into the cold night. Snow drifted through the city again, covering sidewalks and rooftops in white. Across Manhattan, Vincent Romano sat alone in his office long after everyone else had gone home. A stack of reports remained untouched beside him. Instead, his attention focused on a scholarship proposal spread across his desk. It had started as a simple idea. Now it was becoming something larger. A foundation. A program designed to support nursing students facing financial hardship. His advisors thought it was a smart public relations decision. Vincent knew the truth was simpler. He could not stop thinking about a young woman who refused to give up. He remembered seeing me studying flashcards on crowded trains, working double shifts, smiling at customers despite obvious exhaustion. Most people would have surrendered long ago. Somehow I never did. The realization unsettled him in ways he did not fully understand. Meanwhile, I returned home shortly before midnight and found another tuition reminder waiting in my email. My chest tightened as I opened it. The amount due stared back at me from the screen. I closed my eyes briefly. Then I opened my textbooks and began studying anyway. There was no point wasting energy on fear. Fear did not pay bills. Fear did not help Ethan. Fear did not pass exams. Hours later, while the city slept outside my apartment window, I finally drifted off at the kitchen table with notes spread around me. What I did not know was that events already set in motion were moving closer. And for the first time in years, a future that seemed impossible was quietly beginning to move within reach. The crisis arrived on a Monday morning disguised as an ordinary email. I was standing behind the coffee shop counter pouring lattes when my phone vibrated in my apron pocket. Normally, I ignored notifications during work. That morning, something made me check. The message came from the university financial office. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. By the time I finished reading, the world around me seemed quieter. The deadline was final. Tuition had to be paid within 10 days. No extensions. No exceptions. If the balance remained unpaid, my enrollment would be suspended. I stared at the screen while customers continued ordering coffee. The words refused to change no matter how many times I reread them. 10 days. After my shift ended, I sat alone on a bench outside the building while cold winds swept through the street. Snow clung to the edges of sidewalks. Cars moved past in a blur. I opened my banking app. Then I opened my spreadsheet. Then I checked them both again. The numbers were impossible. Even if I worked every available shift, even if I skipped meals, even if I emptied every savings account, it would not be enough. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that I might lose. That evening, I visited Ethan at the hospital. The moment he saw my face, his smile faded slightly. What happened? He asked. Nothing. Ava. He knew me too well. I sat beside his bed and forced a smile. Just a long day. He studied me for several seconds. You are lying. I laughed softly. You should become a detective. You should stop trying to hide things from me. The room fell quiet. Through the window, snow drifted across the city skyline. Finally, I told him about the tuition deadline. Not every detail. Just enough. Ethan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked down at the blanket covering his legs. Maybe you should stop paying for my treatments. The words hit harder than anything else could have. Do not ever say that. But, no, my voice broke before I could stop it. You are not the problem, Ethan. His eyes filled with emotion. Mine probably did too. I just wish things were easier for you, he whispered. I reached over and squeezed his hand. The only thing I want is for you to get better. After leaving the hospital, I walked for nearly an hour instead of taking the subway. The cold air helped me think. Or maybe it simply distracted me from panic. Somewhere along the route, I passed a luxury hotel glowing beneath golden lights. People entered through revolving doors wearing expensive coats and carrying shopping bags. Their lives seemed impossibly distant from mine. High above the city, Vincent Romano stood inside his office looking at a report placed on his desk only minutes earlier. The scholarship program he had quietly funded was ready. Final approvals had been completed. The first recipient had already been selected, Ava Bennett. Yet as he read the latest update about my tuition deadline, he realized something else. If help arrived too late, it would not matter. He moved toward the window overlooking Manhattan, snow-covered rooftops and streets below. For several moments he stood in silence. Then he made a decision. Somewhere in the city, I was preparing myself to choose between my education and my brother's future. What I did not know was that events already in motion were about to change everything. The next morning began like every other. My alarm rang before sunrise. The apartment was cold. The coffee tasted terrible because I had forgotten to buy cream again. Nothing felt different. Yet by lunchtime everything had changed. I was stocking shelves at the grocery store when my phone vibrated. First I ignored it. Then it rang again. And again. Finally, during my break, I stepped into the employee lounge and checked the screen. 3 missed calls from the university financial office. My heart immediately dropped. I assumed the worst. Maybe my enrollment had already been suspended. Maybe another deadline had moved up. Maybe I had run out of time. With shaking hands, I returned the call. A woman answered after the second ring. "Miss Bennett, we have been trying to reach you." My stomach tightened. "I know. I am sorry. I am at work." There was a brief pause. Then her voice softened. "I am calling with good news." Good news. The words sounded so unfamiliar that I almost laughed. What kind of good news? A scholarship fund has selected you as a recipient. For several seconds I could not speak. The employee lounge faded around me. The humming vending machines. The fluorescent lights. The distant sounds of coworkers talking. Everything disappeared beneath a single sentence. "I do not understand," I whispered. "Your tuition balance has been fully covered." I stared at the floor. "Fully?" "Yes." The woman sounded pleased. "In addition, the scholarship includes support for future academic expenses through graduation." My knees nearly gave out. I sat down immediately. "There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake, Miss Bennett." Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. For months I had carried the weight of impossible choices. Tuition or medical bills. School or family. Future or survival. Suddenly that burden was gone. After the call ended, I remained seated for several minutes trying to process what had happened. When I finally looked at my phone again, another notification waited. An email from the hospital. Panic returned instantly. I opened it. Then I read it twice. According to the message, an anonymous donor had established a special assistance fund covering a significant portion of Ethan's upcoming treatment expenses. I stopped breathing for a moment. 2 miracles in one day. That simply did not happen. By evening, I was sitting beside Ethan's hospital bed sharing the news. His eyes widened with every sentence. "Wait," he said. "Your tuition is paid?" I nodded. "And someone helped with your treatment costs." Ethan stared at me. "Who?" "I have no idea." For the first time in weeks, we laughed without forcing it. We talked about the future. Real future plans. Not survival plans. Ethan wanted to visit a baseball stadium someday. I wanted to graduate. Both dreams suddenly felt possible. Across the city, Vincent Romano stood alone beside the windows of his office overlooking Manhattan. Snow drifted beyond the glass. His advisors had encouraged publicity, press releases, recognition. Vincent rejected every suggestion. The scholarship would remain anonymous. The medical assistance would remain anonymous. He did not want gratitude. He did not want attention. For reasons he could not fully explain, knowing that Ava Bennett could finally breathe was enough. Later that night, after leaving the hospital, I walked through the city with tears freezing against my cheeks. For the first time in years, I was not calculating bills. I was not counting dollars. I was not choosing between impossible options. Somewhere in the darkness, a stranger had given me something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. What I did not know was that very soon, I would finally learn who that stranger was. Spring arrived slowly that year. Patches of snow disappeared from sidewalks. Trees began showing hints of green. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was not living one crisis at a time. Ethan's treatments were progressing well. My tuition was covered. Classes no longer felt like a race against impossible odds. Life was still busy, but it finally felt possible. Nearly 3 months passed before I learned the truth. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was leaving campus after a long lab session when the university hosted a small reception for scholarship recipients. Normally I would have skipped it. There was work waiting, homework waiting, life waiting. But one of my professors insisted I attend. The event was held inside a conference room overlooking the city. Students mingled with donors and administrators. I felt completely out of place. Then I saw him. Vincent Romano stood near the windows speaking with the university president. The moment our eyes met, something clicked into place. The scholarship, the timing, the mysterious assistance fund. Every impossible piece suddenly fit together. My heart started racing. After the presentation ended, I walked directly toward him. "It was you." The words escaped before I could stop them. Vincent looked at me for several seconds. Then he smiled faintly. I wondered how long it would take. "Why?" I asked quietly. "Why would you do all of that?" Around us, conversations continued. Glasses clinked. People laughed. Yet the room suddenly felt very small. Vincent glanced toward the skyline before answering. "Because someone should have." I shook my head. "No. Most people would not." He was silent for a moment. "You spent years carrying responsibilities most adults would struggle with." His voice remained calm. "You worked harder than anyone I have ever met. You never asked for help. You never complained. I simply removed obstacles that never should have been there." Emotion tightened my throat. "You changed my life." Vincent's expression softened. "No, Ava." He looked directly at me. "You changed mine." For a second I did not understand. Then he continued. "I spent years believing success was measured by money, influence, and control." He smiled slightly. "Then I met a young woman who measured success by whether her little brother was smiling at the end of the day." Neither of us spoke for several moments. Sometimes the most important truths arrived quietly. Weeks later, I graduated from nursing school. The ceremony took place beneath bright blue skies. Ethan sat in the front row cheering louder than anyone else. When my name was called, I crossed the stage and accepted my diploma. For a brief moment, I thought about every early morning, every late night shift, every bus ride, every sacrifice. Then I looked toward the audience. Ethan was smiling. Vincent was standing beside him. Pride shone clearly in both their faces. Later, after the ceremony ended, we stood together beneath the warm afternoon sun. Ethan hugged me first. Vincent waited until the crowd began thinning. "You did it," he said. I smiled. "We did it." His eyes reflected something deeper than accomplishment. Gratitude, respect, hope. Looking back, I sometimes think about how close I came to giving up. How close I came to believing the future belonged to other people. But life has a strange way of surprising us. Sometimes help arrives from places we never expect. Sometimes kindness changes direction and comes back around. And sometimes the people who teach us the most are not the powerful ones. They are the ones who keep going when every reason says they should stop.